situated at the upper and back part of the neck, beneath the splenius, and medial to the longissimus cervicis in capitis. It arises by a series of tendons from the tips of the transverse processes of the upper 6 or 7 thoracic and the 7th cervical vertebrae, and from the articular processes of the 3 cervical above this. The tendons, uniting, form a broad muscle which passes upward and is inserted between the superior and inferior nuchal lines of the occipital bone. The medial part, usually more or less distinct from the remainder of the muscle, is frequently termed the spinalis capitis. It is also named the biventer cervicis, since it is traversed by an imperfect tendinous inscription. The multifidus spinae, consists of a number of fleshy and tendinous fasciculi which fill up the groove on either side of the spinous processes of the vertebrae, from the sacrum to the axis. In the sacral region, these fasciculi arise from the back of the sacrum as low as the 4th sacral foramen, from the aponeurosis of origin of the sacrospinalis, from the medial surface of the posterior superior iliac spine, and from the posterior sacroiliac ligaments. In the lumbar region, from all the mammillary processes, in the thoracic region, from all the transverse processes, and in the cervical region, from the articular processes of the lower 4 vertebrae. Each fasciculus, passing obliquely upward and medialward, is inserted into the whole length of the spinous process of one of the vertebrae above. These fasciculi vary in length. The most superficial, the longest, pass from one vertebra to the 3rd or 4th above. Those next in order run from one vertebra to the 2nd or 3rd above, while the deepest connect 2 contiguous vertebrae. The rotatories spinae, lie beneath the multifidus and are found only in the thoracic region. They are 11 in number on either side. Each muscle is small and somewhat quadrilateral in form. It arises from the upper and back part of the transverse process, and is inserted into the lower border and lateral surface of the lamina of the vertebra above, the fibers extending as far as the root of the spinous process. The first is found between the 1st and 2nd thoracic vertebrae, the last between the 11th and 12th. Sometimes the number of these muscles is diminished by the absence of one or more from the upper or lower end. The interspinales are short muscular fasciculi placed in pairs between the spinous processes of the contiguous vertebrae, one on either side of the interspinal ligament. In the cervical region they are most distinct, and consist of 6 pairs, the first being situated between the axis and 3rd vertebra, and the last between the 7th cervical and the 1st thoracic. They are small narrow bundles attached above and below to the apices of the spinous processes. In the thoracic region they are found between the 1st and 2nd vertebrae, and sometimes between the 2nd and 3rd, and between the 11th and 12th. In the lumbar region there are 4 pairs, in the intervals between the 5 lumbar vertebrae. There is also occasionally one between the last thoracic and 1st lumbar, and one between the 5th lumbar and the sacrum. The extensor coccygeus is a slender muscular fasciculus which is not always present. It extends over the lower part of the posterior surface of the sacrum and coccyx. It arises by tendinous fibers from the last segment of the sacrum, or first piece of the coccyx, and passes downward to be inserted into the lower part of the coccyx. It is a rudiment of the extensor muscle of the caudal vertebrae of the lower animals. The intertransversales are small muscles placed between the transverse processes of the vertebrae. In the cervical region they are best developed, consisting of rounded muscular and tendinous fasciculi, and are placed in pairs passing between the anterior and the posterior tubercles respectively of the transverse processes of 2 contiguous vertebrae, and separated from one another by an anterior primary division of the cervical nerve which lies in the groove between them. The muscles connecting the anterior tubercles are termed the intertransversarii anterioris, those between the posterior tubercles, the intertransversarii posterioris. Both sets are supplied by the anterior divisions of the spinal nerves. There are 7 pairs of these muscles, the first pair being between the atlas and axis, and the last pair between the 7th cervical and 1st thoracic vertebrae. In the thoracic region they are present between the transverse processes of the lower 3 thoracic vertebrae, and between the transverse processes of the last thoracic and the 1st lumbar. In the lumbar region they are arranged in pairs on either side of the vertebral column, one set occupying the entire interspace between the transverse processes of the lumbar vertebrae, the intertransversarii lateralis, the other set, intertransversarii medialis, passing from the accessory process of one vertebra to the mammillary of the vertebra below. The intertransversarii lateralis are supplied by the anterior divisions, and the intertransversarii medialis by the posterior divisions of the spinal nerves. End of section 34.